The book I want to highlight this week is The Robe, and it's a book I read when I first became a Christian. It's historical fiction about the centurion who won the robe of Jesus. So when Jesus was crucified, it talks about it, it prophesies about it in Psalm 22, actually, written long before Jesus even was born through the prophet David. And then it talks about they will gamble for his clothes. And then in the crucifixion stories in the Gospels, you see this actually happens with Roman soldiers. The Roman soldiers take his robe and they gamble for it, and somebody won it. So this story is the story of the Roman soldier who won the robe of Jesus. And there's a scripture about a woman who makes her way through the crowd because she needs healing. She's looking to touch Jesus. She thinks, if I can just touch the hem of his robe, I'll be healed. So she touches the hem of his robe and is healed instantly. And they kind of take this idea of the anointing and power of Jesus being in his robe and it kind of changing this man's life. And he comes around and through his experiences comes to believe that Christ is the Messiah, the Son of God, and he is the way to salvation for the soul. After this, he realizes, because in Roman times, Christians were persecuted, and he realizes that he's going to be persecuted as a Roman soldier, and people are going to think he's lost his mind. They're going to think he's crazy. So he is on his way home from a trip, and he realizes this new change in him is not going to be easy to share. And so he thinks, what do I have to go home to? And so he sees this little island where it's passing by, the ship is passing by an island, and he puts the robe in his backpack and he decides to just go see what's on the island and stay there. So he goes to this place and it shows exactly what it looks like to make the most of what's right in front of you and not to run after the things that everybody else runs after, but to seek first God's kingdom and watch how everything else is provided. So the main character's name is Marcellus. After a while, Marcellus decided to move on up to the village. The swarthy overseer at the open gate, importantly checking the emerging carts on the slate held in the crook of his hand, hailed him. Was he looking for work? What kind of work? Marcellus wanted to know. The overseer jabbed a thumb toward the melon field. 2 sisters, he said gruffly, and a cot, and food. But the day's nearly half done, sir, said Marcellus. Perhaps 1 sister would be sufficient. I've had no experience in picking melons. The bewildered overseer rested the heavy slate on his hip, spat thoughtfully, and stared at the newcomer, apparently lacking a formula for dealing with this unprecedented situation. While he deliberated, Marcellus picked up one of the big willow baskets from a heaped pile beside the gate and was moving off toward his new occupation. Wait, fellow, called the overseer. Can you read and write? Marcellus admitted that he could. And compute? Yes, Marcellus could compute. Cassio has discharged the scrivener. Who's Cassio? Inquired Marcellus, so unimpressed that the overseer drew himself to full height before declaiming, with a sweep of his arm, embracing the fields and the town, that Appius Cassio owned everything in sight. He pointed toward the villa. Go up there, he said, and ask for Cassio. Tell him Vobiscus sent you. If he doesn't hire you, come back and work on the melons. I'd much rather work on the melons, said Marcellus. The overseer blinked a few times uncertainly. A scrivener is better paid and has better food, he said, slightly nettled by the traveler's stupidity. I suppose so, nodded Marcellus, adding with cool obstinacy, I should prefer to pick melons. Doesn't it make any difference to you, fellow, snapped the overseer, whether you make 2 sisters or 10? Not much, confessed Marcellus. I'm not especially interested in money, and it's quite beautiful out here in the open with that majestic mountain in sight. Vobiscus, shielding his eyes, gazed up at the towering peak beyond Arpino, frowned, looked up again, and grinned a little, and rubbed his chin. You aren't crazy, are you? He asked soberly, and when Marcellus had said he didn't think so, the overseer told him to go on up to the villa. Cassio had the traditional arrogance of a short-statured man of wealth and authority. He was of pugnacious stockiness, 50, smooth-shaven, expensively dressed, with carefully groomed grizzled hair and amazingly well-preserved teeth. It was immediately evident that he was accustomed to barking impatient questions and drowning timorous replies in a deluge of belittling sarcasm. Marcellus had stood quietly waiting while the restless, bumptious fellow marched heavily up and down the length of the cool atrium, shouting his unfavorable opinions of scriveners in general and his most recent one in particular. They were all alike, dishonest, lazy, incompetent. None of them was worth his salt. Every time Cassio passed the applicant, he paused to glare at him belligerently. At first, Marcellus had regarded this noisy exhibition with an impassive face, but as it continued, he found himself unable any longer to repress a broad grin. Cassio stopped in his tracks and scowled. Marcellus chuckled good-humoredly. "It is to laugh, is it?" snarled Cassio, jetting his chin. "Yes," drawled Marcellus, "it is to laugh. Maybe it wouldn't be funny if I were hungry and in dire need of work. I suppose that's the way you talk to everybody who can't afford to talk back." Cassio's mouth hung open and his eyes narrowed with unbelief. "But go right on." Marcellus waved his hand negligently. "Don't mind me, I'll listen. Do you care if I sit down? I've been walking all morning. I'm tired." He eased into a luxurious chair and sighed. Cassio stalked toward him and stood with feet wide apart. "Who are you, fellow?" he demanded. "Well, sir," replied Marcellus with a smile, "while your question asked in that tone deserves no answer at all, I am an unemployed wayfarer. Your man Vibiscus insisted that I offer my services as a scrivener. Realizing that this is your busiest season, I thought I might do you a good turn by helping out for a few days." Cassio ran his stubby fingers through his graying hair and sat down on the edge of an adjacent lectus. "And you, sir," went on Marcellus, "instead of giving me an opportunity to explain my call, began to pour forth." His eyes drifted about through the well-appointed atrium. "If I may venture to say so, you probably don't deserve to live in such a beautiful villa. Your manner of treating strangers doesn't seem to belong here. In these lovely surroundings, there should be nothing but quiet courtesy and goodwill." Cassio, stunned by the stranger's impudence, had listened with amazement. Now he came to his feet, his face contorted with anger. "You can't say things like that to me," he shouted. "Who do you think you are? You insult me in my house, yet you look like a common vagrant, a beggar." "I am not a beggar, sir," said Marcellus quietly. "Get out," snapped Cassio. Marcellus rose, smiled, bowed, walked slowly toward the open peristyle, and down the broad marble steps. Cassio followed him as far as the portico. Sauntering through the village, he went back to the melon field, aware that he was being trailed at a little distance by a tall Macedonian. Vibiscus viewed his return with much interest. "Cassio didn't want you?" he inquired. Marcellus shook his head, picked up a basket, walked through the field until he came to the first little group of laborers. They glanced up with sour curiosity. One old man straightened with a painful grimace and looked him over with utmost frankness. "It was a fine day," observed Marcellus pleasantly. "For a backache," retorted the old man. This drew a sullen chortle from the neighbors, one of whom, a scowling old woman of 20, bitterly admonished him that he'd better work a while and then tell him how fine the day was, conceding this point so cheerfully that the sulky girl gave him a reluctant but pathetically childish smile. Marcellus doffed his robe, folding it carefully and laying it on the ground beside the goatskin bag, and fell to work with enthusiasm. Not so fast, cautioned the old man. "Cassio won't pay you any better for killing yourself. And Vibiscus will be bawling at us for shirking," added a cloddish fellow up the line a little way. "These are the finest melons in the world," remarked Marcellus, stopping to wipe his dripping forehead. "It's a pleasure to work with the finest of something. Not many people have a chance to do that. Sunshine, blue sky, beautiful mountains, and the finest—" "Oh, shut up," yelled the clod. "Shut up yourself," put in the old woman of 20. "Let him talk. They are good melons." For some unknown reason, everybody laughed at that, and in various keys and tempers, the mood of the sweating toilers brightened a little. And I'm going to skip ahead, because as the time passes, he really changes the entire community just with his joy and fearlessness. And so it says, "One afternoon, when fully a score of workers had gathered about him, Marcellus told them a story about a man he knew in a faraway country who had important things to say to poor people with heavy burdens, and how he believed that a man's life did not consist of things he owned, and how much unhappiness could be avoided if men did not covet other men's possessions. If you want to be happy, make other people happy." He paused and found himself looking squarely into Metella's eyes, pleased to see them so softly responsive. "And what did Jesus do to make other people happy?" asked an old man. "Well, in the case of Jesus," Marcellus explained, "he wasn't just an ordinary man, for he performed remarkable deeds of healing. He could make blind men see. People had but to touch him, and they were cured of their diseases. It was dark that evening before the mine workers trudged up the hill. Reproaching himself for having detained them so long, Marcellus had said, "If you want to hear more stories about Jesus, let us meet tomorrow in the village. After that, you have your supper." And so it had become a daily event for Marcellus to meet the people of Arpino on a grassy knoll at the foot of the mountain. He told them of the great surging crowds that had followed Jesus, told them with much detail about the miracles of the little Jonathan's foot and the story of the donkey that the lad gave to his crippled friend. He told them about Miriam's voice and the broken loom that Jesus had mended, and how the woman had woven him a robe. They had sat motionless, hardly breathing, until darkness fell. All Arpino looked forward to these evening stories and discussed them in the fields the next day. Even Vibiscus came and listened. One evening, Antonia and Antony appeared at the edge of the crowd, while Marcellus was telling them about feeding the 5,000 people from a small boy's lunch basket. It was a story of many moods, and the Arpinos laughed and wept over it. And then there was a great storm that Jesus had stilled with a soothing word. "I hear you've been entertaining people with strange stories," remarked Cassio the next day. "About a great teacher, sir," explained Marcellus, "and his deeds for the relief of the people in the provinces of Palestine." "What deeds?" pursued Cassio. And Marcellus had told him a few miracle stories. He said, "Did Jesus deal with only the poor?" "By no means," said Marcellus. "He had friends among the rich, and was frequently invited to their houses. You might be interested, sir, in something that happened at the home of a wealthy man named Zacchaeus." So, I love this story because it explains exactly what I'm trying to highlight about making the most of what's right in front of you, about not running after the things that everybody else is running after, not running after money, not running after some kind of popularity or pleasing people so that, they understand you. Like, he's making friends with the despised in the community, and he's lifting them up because of the love in his heart and the joy in his heart and the things that he knows about the kingdom. So when Jesus says, "Seek first the kingdom," it's like, it means making Jesus king in your heart, honoring him as king everywhere you go. Even in front of people on earth that act like they're kings, we still honor Jesus as king. And so this is what Marcellus did in this community, and I love the redemptive story that's in the book. It is a story of redemption and how somebody had a change of heart, and how that change of heart in them led to change everywhere he went. So this is called The Robe by Lloyd C. Douglas.